There we are. Okay, so session 9. Oh, we're trucking through them. So session 9 of 20. This is the second last session this week before we actually get 2 days off. Yay, weekend. I hope you're all getting that Friday feeling too. So welcome everyone. Welcome to our attendees. Welcome to our panelists. We are going to be looking at non-linear storytelling today. We have the lovely Sarah Coward back with us again to do a talk, and we have Joly and Anna from Four Truck Theatre?
Four-wheel drive
Four-wheel
theatre.
drive.
But we'll go
I'm
with
sorry, it's
four
been a long
truck
week.
theatre, that works.
I'm just winging it just now. I actually have got your introduction written down, so don't worry. I won't just make that
That's
bit
fine.
up.
No, go for it.
Four-wheel drive theatre. We also have Ludovica Fales joining us as well. She'll hopefully be here in a couple of minutes. And we're going to have a really good chat. So the format today is going to be three presentations, followed by a bit of a Q&A from the audience and a little bit of a panel discussion at the end. So basically, I'm just going to have a little bit of housekeeping before we start. So this is the Northern Digital Storytelling Festival. northerndigifest.co.uk is the website. All of the sessions are being recorded and posted there. So if you've missed anything or you want to watch something again, then that's where you can find all of the recordings. Thank you very much to our sponsors, Sign, the Screen Industries Growth Network, for funding the festival. Without them, we couldn't run it. So a big thank you to them, a big shout out to them. And the festival is designed to be accessible to all. It's free to attend. It's live to now and it will be online later, as I say. Yeah, we're just really excited to have you all here. We're looking for a friendly and relaxed kind of vibe today. So just imagine you're sitting having a cup of tea and a bun with your pals. So I'm going to, oh, there we are. There's Ludo. Hi, Ludo. You all right?
Hi, I'm sorry. I had a problem with Zoom. I need just 30 seconds. If you just give me one moment, just 1 second.
Okay. Not sure if I should introduce you guys while we are waiting 30 seconds. I'm going to continue. I'm going to introduce you, Sarah. Okay, so Sarah Coward is the founder and CEO of In the Room. In the Room seeks to transform audience engagement through conversations by enabling audiences and talent to connect with each other. This is achieved through voice interactive conversational media, a powerful tool that integrates voice recognition, AI, and authentic audio-visual media. With applications in entertainment, healthcare, e-commerce, sport, culture, and education, In the Room is transforming communication in multiple global industries. Prior to finding In the Room, Sarah worked at the National Holocaust Centre and Museum, where the Forever Project was born. This award-winning work digitally, get my teeth in, preserves the experience of meeting Holocaust survivors, enabling future generations to hear the testimony and ask questions about their experience. So, Sarah, over to you.
Thanks so much. Always a pleasure to be with you, Heather, and you're keeping your positive energy for the whole week as well through all of the hosting. 2 weeks, yeah, of course.
I'm pacing myself. You imagine how excitable I'd be if it was in date.
Absolutely. No, well done. Brilliant. So I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me a second. Okay. The obligatory question, can you all see my screen?
We can, although you've got some little blocks in the front of it.
I think that's because of what I'll do then, if that's the case. I'll just leave it like that. Have they gone? Or are they still there? It's just because of the Zoom interface.
Oh, okay, they're still there, but you can see this.
Perfect. We'll leave it like that then. I think that's probably for the best.
Okay.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm Sarah Coward, CEO and co-founder of In the Room, the conversational media company. I'm going to give you a little bit of an insight into our history. Heather's covered it a little bit, and other people who know me will already know this, but we'll do a tiny little bit of history just to set the context. And then I'm going to talk about non-linear issues and approaches in the context of personal storytelling, which will probably be sort of different from what some of the other panelists will cover. So I think, hopefully the complement will be quite useful for you. So as Heather said, our origins as a company started at the National Holocaust Centre and Museum, where they had a real strategic issue with their education programme, because the most powerful element of the education program at the museum was when the kids had the opportunity to meet a survivor who had come over to Britain in normally to the late 1930s and had made their home here. And the kids had the opportunity to meet these people, listen to their testimony, and then ask them questions about their life and experience. And it was through that personal encounter that the kids had a much deeper, richer understanding of the history, but importantly had an emotional engagement through that meeting. So the museum was thinking, you know, how are we going to enable next generations to actually have this type of experience? I'm just going to put my timer on so that I don't overrun. How are we going to maintain the power of that experience when these people are no longer here? So we embarked on a big digital project, sort of 2015, to integrate, as Heather said, voice recognition, conversational AI, and real video media, in this case, life-size 3D video, to create an interactive experience whereby people in the audience could ask questions using their voice, and the individual survivor from pre-recorded footage would be able to reply immediately. This is actually, that was done in the UK, but we've also done some work in Germany. This is at the University of Munich in a 3D theatre where you can see one of the survivors sitting waiting for a question whilst the audience wait to ask her a question. And that uses, as I said, conversational AI, voice recognition, and video media. So you have a video interface featuring the talent or the survivor, the witness, the celebrity, the individual you want to talk to. The audience member can ask a question. On our scalable web versions, rather than sort of 3D life-size encounters, you can access these on a mobile device. Ask a question using your voice or text. The AI matches that to the best answer and gets a response from pre-recorded footage. And we, as Heather alluded to, just to sort of get through this part, our technology, now that we've developed our conversational media platform, is now being applied across a range of different industries, including education, entertainment, retail, in terms of e-commerce applications, and healthcare. But all of these experiences represent a personal story or personal experience or personal expertise that need to be powerfully conveyed to an audience using digital means and in a non-linear fashion to create something engaging and personalized for the audience. So one of the experiences I just wanted to pause on, and then we'll get on to some of the issues around non-linear approaches in personal storytelling, was the experience we did with Universal Music and the National Portrait Gallery, featuring the wonderful musician and guitarist Nile Rodgers. Heather worked on part of this project with us. This experience manifested itself in two ways. Firstly, a VR experience, which created a non-linear encounter with Nile. And you see the chair opposite you in the VR experience. You hear the guitar playing in the background. Then Nile walks in playing his guitar, sits down, and yeah, you start to have an interaction with him where you can ask him questions about his rich life in music, his experience of songwriting, his collaborations with amazing people such as David Bowie and Madonna. And as a result of that, you have a non-linear, in-depth encounter with a person and their life story. I'm going to show you, if you bear with me for a second, Heather, if it's okay with you, I'm going to stop sharing this and just go to the website. That's okay. Great. So we delivered this as both a VR experience, working with the great design company Bright White as well. Actually, just give me a second. Just checking I had the sound as well. Brilliant. And I will just play you the trailer. Heather, give me a thumbs up if you can hear it.
Are you ready to freak out? Let me jam for it. Everybody, one time. Thank you.
Okay, I'm ready for your question.
So there he is. And
Get
this is,
goosebumps, Sarah.
I know, he's so cool. So this is the website. Anybody can go onto this, and it gives you an insight into his life and experience, his personal timeline, and the content that's in the experience. And then you can actually go on and have a conversation with Niall. I think I have got time to do this briefly.
Okay, cool.
We are family. I got all my sisters with.
That's fun.
I'll just let him settle down for a moment.
Put my baby back to bed. Well, here we go. So what would you like to talk about first? Me and my inspirations, or my music and collaborations?
Now, I know it doesn't necessarily share very well on Zoom, but so all of this is happening over the web on a slightly dubious internet connection, I have to say. And you can basically interact in a non-linear fashion with him using the voice interface or text, or by choosing one of the options. You and your inspirations. And I'll just ask him a couple of questions, and then we'll go back to the presentation.
Terrific. Let's go. Start with that.
Okay, so I'm not going to ask him one of these selected ones. I'll ask him something else. I'll probably interrupt him because we haven't got time to spend too long with Niall today, but you will be able to access this just on the website. What was it like working with Madonna?
So Madonna was amazing to work with. She was not only fun, but had the most intense work ethic of anyone I've ever worked with. I've never seen an artist more focused. When I met Lady Gaga, I was thinking, okay, that's a serious close second, but I didn't work with Gaga long enough to see it.
I'll ask him one more.
She's pretty intense too. So Madonna and Gaga.
Can you tell me about your outfit?
My amazing outfit? It's, well, it actually does have a little bit of a story. Karl Lagerfeld made, I don't know, 50 to 100 shirts for me before he passed away. And this is one of a lot. These shoes were given to me by Lady Gaga. And you can actually see them if you go see the David Bowie tribute that we did at the Grammys. These are the same exact shoes, so they're just 3 years old now. These jeans, they're just part of my jean collection. I have
I wish I had a gene collection. I do not have a collection of genes.
I don't throw clothes away, so
Right, I'm going to leave
I've
him
had
there.
all the genes.
And I will just, great. So hopefully that just gives you a quick idea of the type of personal storytelling work that we do using this technology. And can you see my screen again now? Presentation, thumbs up.
Yeah.
Good, excellent. So as you can see, it provides the opportunity for a personal encounter using natural human interaction with voice. And one of the interesting things we found with the responses to that from fans were quite interesting emotional responses. So although they know that it's a video experience, the fact that they can actually interact in a non-linear fashion with him as a person does make a difference to how they feel. They even expressed being nervous. One person was embarrassed because they had their pajamas on, even though when they were accessing it at home. So it was really interesting to see the types of responses, and we're seeing that consistently across all of our non-linear personal storytelling experiences. And so now I just wanted to go through a couple of things that we've found in our approach to personal storytelling. So obviously, a person like Niall has a very, very rich history, and part of their story is embodied in them. But we find it very useful to sort of think about how is the person different from the story, and they themselves as an individual person who has a story to tell, but the story itself has its own life and can be told by different types of people from which you get different perspectives. So the types of work that we do, whilst it does connect with storytelling, it's much more about the person, the presence of that person, as well as the story about themselves or the things about themselves that they're saying. And similarly, with personal storytelling, as opposed to sort of fictional narrative storytelling, potentially, the issues around what does linear mean in personal storytelling is quite interesting. So does linear mean for a personal story a timeline, taking somebody from their childhood to where they are today? Or does it mean something potentially more thematic, where you're following a linear journey through a theme? So it could be family relationships or something like that. And so what we were looking at when we were working with Holocaust survivors was really thinking about how we reflect on real life encounters. So in a normal real life encounter, you all meet somebody in a separate and different way. So we never start from a linear approach if you're actually meeting somebody for the first time at an event or in a shop or wherever it is. We all start from a different perspective. So our encounter with, can you see that okay? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of little blocks, but it's not.
We'll just ignore that. Yeah, it's fine. So the way in which someone's story naturally, when you actually meet somebody in person, it's more like a jungle or a forest where you might be sort of helicoptered in to part of this rich tapestry of someone's experience, but everybody starts at a slightly different point, and you've landed in an area from which you can explore. And we have that in our everyday lives as we meet new people. So naturally, we never really experience somebody else's life story in a linear way. And we see that reflected in people's engagement around non-linear personal storytelling and their responsiveness and interest in engaging their curiosity about somebody else. These are some of the quotes that we got back from people exploring Holocaust survivor testimony using these types of techniques. So there are a couple of points that just wanted to highlight around what we would describe as non-linear personal exploration rather than storytelling necessarily, that the story starts, the start points might be very different for different people. So if you meet somebody at an event, or you met Nile Rodgers at an event, it would be very different from meeting him in a different scenario, and your questions and starting point might be different. If you're a musician and meeting somebody like that, your starting point for inquiry will be very different. Secondly, meanings of each of these different parts of the encounters can really change according to the context. So if you, for example, you obviously in real life, if you met a survivor of the Holocaust, but you met them in a shop, something completely dissociated, you wouldn't know that they were a survivor. And you might get to know them a little bit and observe aspects about how they interacted and their attitude to life. And you might take certain views of that, but without knowing that they were a Holocaust survivor, your views might be quite different. So your context and your understanding of their story changes according to the context of knowledge that you've already built up. Similarly, we've found that with our non-linear personal exploration, the amount of time that people spend on these types of experiences, because the journey is in no way curated, it's quite sort of flat, it's an exploration, it's a forest of exploration. Some people might spend a few minutes on it, other people might spend an hour and a half within the same experience. And then just a couple more points. With personal storytelling like this, I'll try and avoid the word storytelling, but there's no real beginning, middle and end other than the one that's in your head. So in terms of the curation of the experience, there's no need for a curated ending. You just have the opportunity to sort of dive in to the forest, so to speak. And that also provides people with the opportunity to come back and explore more as they dive further into someone's personal experience, history and knowledge. And that's me. Thank you very much. I think I was a little tiny bit over, but hopefully it's okay.
That's okay, no problem. Thank you. That's great. Thank you, Sarah. Really interesting. So I'm going to shoot straight into the next presentation. Welcome, Ludo. Sorry, I thought I'll crack on with the introduction, and then what we'll do is we'll do introductions for each person separately, and then we'll have a wee chat at the end, if that's okay. Brilliant. So I'm going to introduce Anna and Joly next to talk about their new exciting business proposition and project. So Joly and Anna are co-founders of 4-Wheel Drive, a new theatre company producing off-road theatrical experiences in the non-traditional theatrical spaces of York. Anna is a York-based director interested in immersive theatre and virtual reality, and has spent the last 6 months working across virtual production musical theatre. Joly, currently studying at the University of York, is passionate about pushing the boundaries of possibility within theatre and has freelanced on open-air productions at Kew Gardens. Anna and Joly will be discussing their Immerse project, which aims to create a non-linear narrative combining the heritage, history and political gravitas of the council chambers at the Guildhall in York. And this form of audience-led narrative gives the viewer agency in the outcome of the play. Over to you guys.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Heather. Can you hear us, see us, and see our slides all okay?
Yeah, we can see your slides fine, thank you, and hear you fine.
Amazing, good stuff. So yeah, as you touched on, we're 4-Wheel Drive. I'm Joly, the co-founder and executive producer.
Oh, I'm Anna, a co-founder and artistic director.
Yeah, so what is 4-Wheel Drive? Well, we aim to provide off-road theatrical experiences in York, and we've got 4 wheels to our operation, which Anna will talk about.
Yeah, so the first wheel to our operation is Educate. That's our project that's in motion at the moment, and when we're taking interactive Shakespeare workshops into schools for GCSE revision. Our next wheel is Connect, where we're aiming to connect and inspire creatives around the York area. Our third project is Immerse, which is the one we'll be talking to you about today. And our final project is Inspire.
Yeah, so obviously we're talking about non-linear narratives, and Sarah I found that really interesting, kind of looking at how an interview can be much more engaging if you kind of have that agency to choose, as an audience member, to choose where it goes. But we're kind of talking about non-linear narratives in a similar sense of out of chronological order, and kind of what that looks like as a narrative.
Yeah, I mean, when I heard non-linear narratives, I think there's there's some connotations of innovation there, which I think there certainly is, but I think non-linear narratives are a lot more familiar to us than we might think. You know, anything out of chronological order, whether that be a flashback in a film or a book that looks at the past or the future, is all non-linear and something that we can all be familiar with as well.
I feel like by the time we've done, we would have said that word so many times. It's starting to go a bit strange. But so what is our kind of take, and how are we using non-linear narratives with our projects? So what I've kind of done as a little diagram here is I'll explain to you how we interpret and use non-linear narratives for our Immerse project. So we've got this first section, which is very much linear, and that's going to be kind of the introduction of the play, introducing our audience to the setting and the characters and the plot. And then the narrative diverges, and we've got a moment of choice for the audience. So the audience can go left or right, and the choice here takes the play in a certain direction. And our Immerse project is a political thriller. So this means that the audience has a real involvement in the actual politics of the thriller, and they get to see the kind of outcomes of their choices. And then we have another moment again of where the narrative diverges and they choose kind of left or right, as it were, which means that the final outcome that the audience will watch, there are actually 3 alternative outcomes. So you could essentially come on 4 different nights and see 4 different plays, or not, I suppose. You could see the same thing. It's all dependent on what the audience is in the room. So let's talk a little bit more about what that looks like and what the project actually is. So this is Immerse.
Yeah, this is the council chambers at the Guildhall in York. It's such a wonderful place, and when I walked in there, I was just in awe of the history in the space, which is why we want to make the audience feel as involved in that history and that experience as possible. So I think non-linear narratives is particularly synonymous with ideas of audience immersion, but also work particularly well when we take theatre out of its traditional space. So you can imagine here in the Guildhall, the audience will be sat in the midst of the action in the council chambers, and allowing them to make choices in terms of what happens in the politics of the play allows them to feel like an active participant and almost like a character themselves.
So our setting is in, obviously, the council chambers of the Guildhall, but we're trying to connect our audiences with the history, so setting it in the 1500s, kind of taking them back in time to when this space was really kind of politically involved locally, and in sometimes more nationally as well, in kind of political decisions. And I think that's kind of part of, and we'll touch on this later, you know, why we want to do this and why the non-linear form kind of works for this, because we're engaging rather than kind of just that level of, okay, you're in the space and, you know, there's a person in a costume that feels quite old-fashioned. It's kind of, we're inviting them to become characters in that space. But this also poses a lot of questions, which we're going to seek to answer some of, but also leave some unanswered as we're still working them out. So the first one is kind of over the idea of audience agency. How do we make the audience involved, and how do we give them that decision making? So the way that we've kind of, in this idea, this concept that we've got, the way that we've kind of made this clearer is by having left or right decisions. So you can either go this way or that way, which means that we can structure our narrative to have moments of choice and flexibility, but it's not kind of 28 plays rolled in one with moments of choice every 5 minutes. It's more structured, so it means that we've got 4 plays, 4 final outcomes kind of in one. But I guess that raises the question of, is writing 4 plays in one, is that 4 times the work? Is that 4 times the cost? How do you sell this to an audience member? What do we what can an audience member expect, and how do we market that?
Yeah, I think audience expectations is a huge thing with non-linear narratives, especially when you're giving the audience that choice to control it. Setting up audience expectations is an incredibly important thing to do, so they know their role within the structure and within the narrative itself. This can be quite difficult to do at times. I just did a project where we were doing a musical in VR, and we had to have onboarding where we gave the audience instructions and set out our expectations of them and what they can and can't do within that world as well. But I think in this political sense that we are obviously exploring with our play here, audience agency is quite a nice thing to use, because sometimes we write plays with a message, and presenting it to the audience, if not done correctly, can often come across quite intimidating and sometimes a tad bit preachy at times. But giving the audience that choice, they're controlling the moral outcome, and therefore they're controlling what they take away and what they learn from it, which I think is a really interesting way of pursuing that form of theatre.
And we had a really interesting encounter actually the other day in a bike shop, of all places, where we were talking to them about what we were doing, and they said, "Oh, are you slating the Tories then?" And we said, "Okay, well, no, because it's set in kind of the 1500s, so the Tories weren't really a thing necessarily, or in the same capacity then, but also we're giving our audience the decision to work out which way we're going to go. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be, right, if you're left wing, go here, if you're right wing, go here, because I'm sure that would result in some very interesting some things. But we want to kind of keep it open so that people can, kind of like you say, it's not as aggressive in a sense of political theatre, and people have that choice and can decide kind of what the moral outcomes want to be, but we can still then show them what the results of that are, and it can be a kind of inspiring experience, I suppose.
So we've talked a lot about theatre here, but what about the tech? How does non-linear storytelling work within technology? So as I briefly touched upon, I do some work in virtual reality, particularly theatre in virtual reality. And one thing we are looking at is how to tell those stories in that space. Now, in terms of our non-linear concept, it's giving audience choice, but in the virtual reality space, it's sometimes a little bit different than that. So, for example, there's 2 ways that we did this. If you've got your controllers, you can move around the space, you can decide where you go and what path you will physically follow in that world, in that story. Or it's as simple as just deciding where you're looking, right? You could be looking over at something over there and missing what's happening over there, but that's, non-linear narratives, because you're choosing what you look at and what you experience within that story in that world. And
I think that kind of raises a lot of questions. Luckily, by having these left and right decisions, it's we can structure our non-linear narrative a bit more. Again, that word, non-linear narrative. We can structure kind of how the story goes by having those moments of decision. But there's a lot of questions over how do we create this? What is our process, and how do we mitigate kind of all of some of the questions and the risks that I posed earlier of the 4 times multiplier on the work? And we look to do this through our writers' room. So we want a collaborative approach. We are still learning kind of as we go how best to create and develop this piece of theatre. And we're working with students in our network from the University of York, but we're also trying to work with more experienced writers as well. And I guess just as an open call out, if there is anyone here who's kind of listening and thinking, oh, that's great, or I've got some questions, or have you thought about this, or I could help, our emails will be at the end, so please do reach out to us. But I think this idea of collaboration makes it a much kind of better way to develop this as a cohesive entity that has these 4 defined outcomes.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the writers' room is a great way to throw around ideas. Ultimately, the question is, are we writing 4 different plays here? Is this 4 different ideas? Is this 4 different concepts? And that's still something that we're working on and trying to figure out. But the writer's room is a really nice way to bounce those ideas off of each other.
But beyond the kind of creative elements, there's a lot of business considerations illustrated by my money size. And that kind of comes down to the audience. So we've said that we're immersing people with the Guildhall, with the council chambers, but I think that raises some challenges of what is this? It's not, is it a play? Is it a performance? Or is it a historic experience? Is it a political experience? Is it a tour of the Guildhall? So we've had to kind of make sure that our audience journey is both inviting them to interact and inviting them to engage and onboarding them into this process. But it also has to kind of set parameters to make sure that people don't wander off and take themselves off on a guided tour. What if people don't engage in the way that we envisioned and don't interact and don't go down those left or rights? What if people engage too much and start heckling or start kind of interjecting or just get up and leave and go around the Guildhall? These are all things that we have to consider, because it's not just kind of, we're not just staging an Agatha Christie in this setting, and we're moving beyond those conventions of theatre. And those conventions come with kind of inherent rules and a discipline. So that's a big consideration.
Yeah, and I think another consideration is, you know, from a directing perspective, is obviously the actors that you're working with. You're giving your actors a lot more to work with and to consider here. And also you're giving them the consideration of, well, what if this then happens? What if the audience does this? What do you do then? So within those 4 narratives, there is the potential for other narratives to arise dependent on what the audience decide that they want to do. Obviously, I think, going back to what we said earlier, it's important to make those expectations of the audience clear, to avoid those things from happening that you probably wouldn't want to happen.
We've definitely asked a lot of questions in this presentation as we're still kind of figuring out how best to kind of create this. And a big question is why? You know, why non-linear? Why don't we just do a new political thriller in the Guildhall Council Chambers? Why have we had to add this multi-strand narrative non-linear element? And I think the idea is it's that extra level of engagement. It's allowing people to immerse with the space and interact with each other, and in a new and in a different way. And I think what it allows us to do is have that kind of energy and connection as people, the people that you come in with to watch this play, you may start disagreeing with. You know, that I think there's that great thing about theatre, that it's got the power to inspire conversation, and you leave and buzzing and talking to people, and this live experience has promoted that. And we want to accelerate that by having that conversation. Oh, well, I wanted to see what happened if we chose that, or why did you choose that way, or which way did you choose, you know? And kind of everyone is in this experience together and has to navigate this narrative in a new and an exciting way.
And from like a practitioner point of view, it's lovely because we're breaking down that barrier. You know, even when you go to the theatre, there is a physical barrier, physical separation. You might check your watch, you might whisper something to the person next to you. It's breaking down those barriers and allowing the audience to be completely involved in what's happening around them, not just in front of them.
So that's our presentation. Our website is there, and our emails are there as well. So please do reach out if you have any questions or any feedback. And we hopefully look forward to seeing some people in July at our Connect Festival, and then in the end of November for Immerse.
Thank you very much. That was brilliant. Thank you, guys. Really interesting, and I hopefully, yeah, let us know when it is, and we'll publicize it and help with that as well. So yeah, brilliant.
Thank you.
You got there in the end. Well done. Okay, so moving swiftly on, let me introduce Ludo. Just find my right bit of paper. Here we are. Okay, so Ludovica Fales, I hope I said that right, studied theoretical philosophy in Rome and cultural anthropology in Berlin, where she obtained a master's in documentary direction at the National Film and Television School in 2011, followed by an international PhD in audiovisual studies. Over the course of her career, she has worked as a director, producer, and assistant documentary filmmaker for LIFTA, BBC, and Al Jazeera. For the past 10 years, she's collaborated with documentary and human rights festivals, teaching cinema and new media in Bosnia, Kosovo, and the Mediterranean as a form of conflict resolution and in support of strong female voices. She has also taught experimental documentary and interactive storytelling at UCL and Sorbonne Nouvelle in Paris, whilst developing research on collective storytelling and new media projects, new forms of agency and participation, and spaces of coalescence between the digital and material dimensions. So for today's talk, Ludo is going to talk about experimental films and how they've challenged linear storytelling in a wide range of artistic, poetic, humorous, political and highly creative ways, always distinguishing themselves by a non-linear and non-narrative movement, don't mind my dog, of thoughts that draw on many different sources of knowledge. Digital media, immersed in a cross and transmedia landscape, are now embracing a stronger focus on non-linearity and the redefinition of the relationship between story and audience. Through embodiment, haptic enablers, and 360 immersive storytelling, digital storytellers are exploring new and innovative applications that may well become part of the conventions of the future. So in this session, Ludo will explore the genealogy that connects non-linear storytelling projects from the past to non-linear storytelling projects employing digital media. Over to you, Ludo.
Thank you. So, okay, I'm gonna bring a little bit of a historical point of view here, just for a change. So I'm gonna share my screen, because we always talk about non-linear storytelling as if it was something that somehow was invented together and in conjunction with digital media. Can you see my screen, by the way?
Yep.
Yeah. But in fact, there is an incredible tradition of non-linear storytelling that tells us a lot of things about where this desire to tell stories non-linearly come from, and actually the richness that comes from history that can tell us something about what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve. So I don't know how I'm going to move this, but let me see if it works. Does it work? Yes. Okay. So, okay, we know very well that experimental storytelling is all about challenging linearity, challenging story, deconstructing time and space, challenging the arc of character. But we don't know, maybe, or some people will know, but not everyone will know that this is something that actually comes already from the 20s, from avant-garde movements. We can see here some examples of historical films like Un chien andalou by Louis Buñuel and Salvatore Dali, 1929, and then Meshes of the Afternoon by Maya Deren, 1943, and Cat's Cradle here by Stan Brakhage, 1949. So all of them were already embracing some forms of non-linearity, some strong forms of non-linearity. And in particular, if we go back to surrealism, to the very beginning of when the whole idea of non-linearity started, the idea was to create a new kind of art for a new kind of social and perceptual world, as a breakthrough to the future, as a way to liberate humanity, as a way to change the relationship between signifier and signified. So the idea was really to challenge language, and for language also a new way, an entire way of seeing reality, of understanding reality, of getting to know reality, and therefore a whole idea of power. So the idea that Breton had about embracing non-linearity was to actually try and look into the, he would call the unfathomable depths of our mind, of our soul, let's say, the world of dreams, in which reigns and the absence of contradictions, the relaxation of emotional tensions due to repression, he would say, a lack of sense of time, the replacement of external reality by a psychic reality, obeying the pleasures principle. So the idea of challenging time and space was something that was coming there from a research into a different way of experiencing reality, which was really a way of getting in contact with ourselves in a deeper way. And therefore, the idea of time and space was challenged because it was a way of challenging dramatic realism as a whole. And challenging dramatic realism as a whole meant challenging continuity and harmony, the archetype of the point of view, and the traditional distinction between figure and ground. So what are we bringing into current digital storytelling? Well, we are actually bringing back something. We have inherited something really important, which is the idea of experience. And the idea of experience is that we all somehow ask ourselves a fundamental question, which is, how is it possible to capture the present? How are we able to be in the present and feel the sense of present beyond text, beyond story, embracing a multiplicity of forms? And so maybe the real issue here is the question of participatory experience and the interactive dynamic that somehow we all embrace when thinking about a project like this, which is the relationship between the user and the experience. And it is actually the idea of influencing the storyline to some degree and allowing the audience to alter the storyline, which comes, as we know very well, from gaming. And it was actually somehow translated into a wider ecosystem of media. And this, as other colleagues said, as actually my colleagues before, Joly, said, it's all about agency. And agency is the satisfying power to take meaningful action and see the results of our decisions and choices. So even a kid can actually really appreciate this sense of building something and seeing the result of our action. So if we actually bring some actions to an experience, a creative experience, and feel this is meaningful, and feel that the changes we make are meaningful, that we are taking decisions freely, we actually feel that we have a sense of agency. And therefore, what is the role of the author if the agency is left to the user, to the audience? What is the role of the audience? The author is that of being an architect somehow, so facilitating the relationship between the user and the experience. And it can be done in three different ways, at least I identified, which are all ways of managing the level of agency somehow. One is somehow to keep the focus on the story, but actually make it more media rich, and it could be in the form of an interactive platform, or it can be in the form of, for example, a multimedia experience. It can be in the form of also some mixed reality experience or locative projects that involve a multiplicity of media sort of involved in the experience. Or it could be about somehow stepping back from the story, becoming a curator and presenting other people's point of view. So creating a space where somehow other people are allowed to bring in their own experience of some sort, but the design and the whole concept is still in the hands of the author, who is an architect. Or it could be even just becoming a facilitator for others to build their stories. For example, if you remember some years ago, YouTube created this editing feature that allowed people to edit Creative Commons projects that were Creative Commons footage that was left on YouTube for others to edit, so that everybody could actually make it their own film coming from that. So what are the takeaways that we can still somehow, somehow where we can feel that the relationship between the past and the present is still very much alive, and it's somewhat useful for our for our daily practice, for our contemporary practice. Well, one is that story is still key. Even if it's non-linear, there still needs to be an element of storytelling, even if we want to avoid sometimes the word storytelling, but actually story, the strength of a topic, the strength of a relationship to reality is still somehow key. Also, that there is an impact in the relationship between the user and the experience, and it's to do with the way the user changes their relationship to reality during the experience. Then that actually the medium we choose is not the first thing we go to, but it's actually the result of a series of choices, so that we are not slave to technology. The technology comes after we really understand our purpose and really understand what we're trying to create as a shift for the audience. And then there is no right way. This is really an experimental field, and we're still all trying to understand what we're doing. So I feel that in this post-cinematic sort of scenario, and we call it post-cinematic just because a lot of people still have references to cinema, we have actually a new set of experiences that are mobile, multiple, non-linear, embodied, active, and agent, and that don't involve the logic of the assembly, but the logic of the network, and all involve an element of feedback. So there is always an exchange in place. And this element of process means that the experience doesn't pre-exist the actual project, but it's created by the user as they go along the experience itself. So obviously, then we have a very process-based sort of project environment, where we need to think about the relationship between the mobility of the spectator and the movement of the visual space around the spectator. And this is the biggest challenge, as the biggest challenge will be in the future, not only the user-device kind of relationship, but also the device-device relationship, because we know that devices are actually taking a lot of autonomy. We know that with the advent of AI getting more and more autonomy, there is the possibility in the future to create an experience and interactions between devices and between machines where the user is pushed to the margins. So how are we keeping this human element alive, and how are we keeping this interaction going to actually still preserve the richness of this encounter? So yeah, that's all from me. So I'm open to question, but I just wanted to bring a little bit of a reflection on the past and link it to the present. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wow. So much stuff in there to think about. You know, it's been amazing this week, actually, just the amount of really interesting perspectives around storytelling and all of these different elements with machine learning and AI, and as well as all of the usual stuff. We say usual stuff now, like VR and AR, you know, they say it's moving so quickly, and you know, there's just so many different elements to consider when being creative these days and making stories. So thank you very much for that. That was really insightful, and thank you to all of you for your presentations. So let's get on with some Q&A then. So we've got a couple of questions coming through just for the attendees. If you want to ask some questions, just check out the Q&A box at the bottom and feel free to put your questions in there, and then we'll be able to ask the participants. So Joe Hayes starts off. Hi guys, I know you said you're branching out from the traditional Agatha Christie production. However, I was just wondering if you were at all inspired by Witness for the Prosecution set in a similar immersive space.
Yes, it's a great question, and there was definitely some inspiration there. So I went to watch Witness for the Prosecution, which is a play by Agatha Christie, but they've staged it in the county courts in London. So it's got a real kind of grandeur in the sense of you're immersing in an incredible courtroom. And I think what I found that was great about it is it's got just that extra level. You know, you go to a theatre and it's very nice, and you get a glass of wine and get your programme, and they had that, but you're actually going into a courtroom, and you can sit in the jury and kind of dictate part of the very final bit of the play. And what I found out after, almost by coincidence, after we secured the Guildhall, was that in, I can't remember the date, it was either 2015 or 2017, maybe it was before that, the witness for the prosecution in this kind of production started in York in the council chambers before the Guildhall was renovated through COVID when the university renovated it, which was a funny little coincidence. But obviously the difference is with our version is it's a new play rather than using something that was kind of written and then applied to the space. So it means that we can really hone in on that site specificness. And also it's completely kind of dictated by the audience rather than having that little moment. And the witness for the prosecution, it leads you to a decision. You kind of, I imagine, and this is an assumption, but I imagine that every night this decision is the same because it feels very, that's the obvious choice. So whereas ours, we want it to be a bit more kind of, have a bit more this or that kind of, it could go either way, more a split hair decision.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, how did you account for questions that you don't have answers for?
Yes, it's a good question. We get this issue across a number of different experiences, but so firstly, in the curation of the question sets, we take account of the breadth of the topic. So you kind of identify that bell curve of questions so that you're most likely to be capturing most of the questions that are asked. There will be outliers of that. So there is a default response that if it falls below a certain confidence level, then we record additional assets, which basically, I'm really sorry, I can't, you can make it fun, you can make it funny response or a serious response, but something like, I'm sorry, I can't answer that one at the moment, why don't you try something else? Or you can actually take people to other resources. Because of the flexibility of our underlying platform, you can also get an insight into questions that have been asked and not answered, and then add in additional media content to answer new questions as you develop.
Saying that, you did do a fair whack of questions, so you've got a good chance.
For Niall, yeah, for Niall we did, yeah.
But
they really range now depending on the application. So I mean, the Holocaust survivors answered between 800 and 1400 questions each. Niall answered about 348, I think, I remember. But some of the experiences we're doing now are 30 or 50, so a lot smaller, because the context of the conversation is very prescribed, and people understand why they're there. So it really just depends on the context.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, Damien has asked a question: did anyone include actors in the writing process, and if so, did any interesting issues arise? I guess that's for you guys, is it, Joly and Anna?
Yeah, I was thinking, is that for us? So our writing process is ongoing. So it's definitely a really interesting consideration of how do you make sure that this is something that the actors are comfortable with. But I guess something that we can touch on is how with our Educate project, we've essentially rewritten, when I say you've rewritten the Macbeth script to condense it into like one lesson for GCSE English students.
Yeah, I think it's
what issues have arisen with that, with that kind of being improvising free versus scripted?
Yeah, I think it's important to give your actors something, because otherwise what are we working with? But I think it's so important, and I think the rehearsal process and working with actors informs the final script massively. So we don't lock in scripts and then take it to a rehearsal room. This is the bare bones. We'll workshop it in the rehearsals, and the rehearsals will then inform the final script.
Very good, thank you. Okay, Adeline's asking a question to you, Ludo. Is there a particular method or factors you use to gauge how experimental a story can go while still identifying with audiences?
So obviously, as all practitioners know as well, I think the fundamental tool is user testing, and there isn't so much. I mean, there's a lot that can be decided in advance, but then the sort of agency, the level of satisfaction in the agency, the level of shift and change that the audience goes through needs to be assessed through user testing. So I think that the element of experimentalism is a sort of methodological approach that allows practitioners to really be open and to really think about a really wide set of tools, a different way of using space, a different way of using time, positioning the users always in different sort of relationship to the environment that feel alive, so that the experience feel alive. But I don't think there is any prescription to that, and we're very much still in the process of experimenting a lot of with a lot of different technologies and different ways of combining technologies. Recently, I've been working as a consultant on a project that was trying to bring the audience to actually do some stitching, the actual stitching, in real life, while also doing it in VR, and the amount of questions that came from trying to bring that experience to life, the amount of questions to do with usability and the different kind of users, and different how we all use hands, whether we all have hands to use, etc., etc. It's a set of questions that come with the experimentalism, because we're dealing with real people. People are diverse and different, so we always need to take this into account as well, I guess.
Hopefully that answers your question. Thank you. And Robbie's asked another one, which I think probably just kind of leads on a little bit from that, actually, and that is, what is the best amount of agency to give an audience, if there is such a thing? I think that one's to you as well, Ludo. Making you work hard.
So if there is a, so what's the question? If the best amount of audience to give an audience.
What's the best amount of agency to give your audience?
Sorry, the best amount of agency. Well, I can talk about when I felt the most agency as a user, as a viewer, and it was when I felt I was discovering something for the first time, when the answers were not given, and I was not redoing something that I normally do in real life, but I was doing something different. So to me, it has to be a real experience. It doesn't have to be a simulation of an experience, but rather an experience that make you feel anew, the world, you're discovering the world anew. So I don't think there is any limits to the amount of agency, as long as it feels truthful. So that would be my answer. I don't know if my colleagues agree.
I don't know. What do you guys think? Is there an amount or level of agency that works best for you guys?
I think it's a really interesting question, and let's have a chat in December, and maybe we'll have an answer for you. I think I think there's some other questions kind of touching on this sort of thing of, how do you keep it to 4 narratives? How do you kind of contain it within an experience? And I think it's finding that sweet spot. And to be honest, I don't know exactly how we're going to do that, but it's just about kind of trying it, putting it in front of an audience, see what happens, and then developing it from there, I think.
I think one of the things we find, it's really interesting to think about structuring and agency as issues, because most of our experiences are sort of extreme agency, in that you dive in and you can ask, you have suggestions, but you're not kept to those, so you can ask whatever you like in this pool. However, there are some experiences that we've done which are actually quite structured, and it does bring a level of complexity around the thought, and the choices to constrain are quite difficult ones to make, aren't they? Because sometimes they're necessary, but it does cause some headaches in terms of what does that mean, because you're taking people through certain flows. So sometimes I think the creation of structure feels like it should be easier, but it actually makes it harder.
Well, I was wondering, Sarah, when you were talking and when you said that you're going to create ones that only have 30 questions, it's really interesting of how you almost have to think like the audience. What are they going to want to ask Niall? And then it's kind of working out if you're reducing that from 400 or 300 or something down to 30. Okay, how do we really structure this? And I think that must be fascinating.
Well, yeah, the key thing is actually the context of the conversation. So if you're having because obviously we do commercial work as well as the sort of more experiential work. So in the commercial approach, so say you're talking about a product and it's a single product. And so the audience is coming there to ask about that particular thing. So the conversation itself is very, very tight and very well scoped. So that means that people's expectations, if they ask about something else beyond that small scope, they're not surprised if it doesn't cover that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I also think the playfulness of it all is really wonderful, whether the answer is appropriate or not. So there is this other project you probably all know about, which is called My Grandmother's Lingo. Have you ever heard of this project?
No.
It's an interactive documentary project where you are supposed to be learning an indigenous language that belongs to is the native language of the grandmother of the writer, of the director, and the interaction is based on the idea that you repeat words in the language, and you're learning while you progress with the story. And obviously it doesn't always work. The microphone is not always in use. Not every computer is able to actually perform in the same way. Sometimes you're not able to pronounce it right. So it doesn't really matter whether it works fully or not, but it's so heartwarming for the user to be able to actually learn a language and having this as a device for the story to continue. And in that example, the user experience and the content and the meaning of the experience are absolutely in line. And you are learning the language, which is a way to preserve a language from disappearing. And you're also learning about the culture of the place. And you're also learning about a personal story. So it's all everything is working really well in a very synthetic way. And it just flows. So it allows the audience to really feel inside, even if it doesn't work perfectly. It doesn't really matter.
You imagine adding AI into that, so you actually got the sound of your gran saying the words in that experience. It would be amazing, wouldn't it? And a wee bit freaky. It's amazing. Okay, so a question from Jed for Anna and Joly. Do you stick to the branching scripts, or do you encourage improv in response to the audience's inputs during the performance?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I guess, and because there's another question about how do you stop it from going to more than 4, and I think I can kind of answer them in one, which is the four strands are really integral to structuring that answer. Not structuring the answer, sorry, structuring the piece, the experience, because otherwise we can't provide kind of what Sarah's able to provide of 300 plus kind of answers to their questions. We have to have some direction in order to contain it. But we want to have that the actors to have that somewhat flexibility. So if the room is kind of, if it's a really split hair decision versus if it was a landslide one way or the other, as is the case in politics, the effect could be the same. We go down the same narrative strand, but the reaction to that is a bit more. People's egos are on one side are more inflated and more. They kind of go down that path a bit more if they've got the decision that they were fighting for in these council chambers. Whereas if it's a bit more split hair, it could be more tense, you know, maybe someone shouts out, let's have a revote or something like that. So I guess it's trying to incorporate that flexibility whilst keeping it on the tracks of these 4 strands.
Yeah, I think it's important to allow your actors and audiences to have that relationship with one another. And I think that provides a uniqueness to the experience. I mean, I did a show in June and it's loosely immersive. I'm not going to slap immersive on it because it wasn't quite there. But we encouraged the actors to improv, and we encouraged the audiences to interact and engage and speak. And as a result, every single night was a completely different experience. So I think having, you know, giving your actors the freedom to improvise, although, you know, sometimes it's a dangerous path to tread on, but it can be incredibly rewarding.
And it's just the joy of working with a live medium. You know, to do that digitally, you'd need AI and, you know, and it's a longer production process, but because it's live, you can, that liveness gives it such kind of a flexibility there, which is really nice.
Brilliant. Okay, Sarah, Robbie's asking, what effect does the use of has the use of deep fakes had on your work, if any?
We really focus on authentic media. We can work with synthetic media in our approaches, but we don't at the moment. So from some testing and research we did, we know that audiences, even if synthetic experiences look perfect, so even if the deep fake is outstandingly good, as responsible institutions need to be clear about what is a deep fake and what is authentic. And that will become even more so. The more deepfakes become a problem, the more that organisations will need to state whether or not this is generated content or not. And from our research that we did with Manchester Met University, people's emotional response to the content is fundamentally affected by whether they think it is authentic or deepfake media, which sounds obvious, but it is something you need to take into account when you're using deepfakes, that the emotional response and the engagement is not going to be the same as if they know it is something that has been genuinely said and genuinely recorded by that individual person.
Okay. Zulfia's asked a question to you, Ludo. What are your thoughts around non-linear storytelling in documentary, especially with the emergence of interactive documentaries and web documentaries? Do you think this form engages audiences better with reality than traditional documentaries?
Well, I think what we were saying before is still relevant, that it's about shifting the idea of what we consider reality, and therefore the sort of reframing our idea of engaging with reality. So if reality is something that somehow it's preconceived and needs to have a specific structure to be somehow documented, and therefore a specific idea of space and time, then obviously interactive documentaries are not the right form. But if you believe, like I do, that reality is actually an experience that it's constantly changing and transforming itself, and that the certain idea of linear story, linear space and time is a convention, and actually it's more about the flow and how we relate to reality, and that is more interesting to document, well, in that case, I feel that interactive documentaries, as well as other experiences involving nonlinear media, actually allow us to get to know reality in a completely different way. So it's an experience that changes us, and it's not just a product that stands by itself, but it doesn't pre-exist if we don't try it. Therefore, it's as an academic as well as a practitioner, it's always very difficult to archive this project or talk about projects that you haven't tried yourself, or it's always very difficult to show students the actual document, because it's something that involves someone or often in a first person perspective to be involved. So yeah, for me it's a different relationship to reality and a different conception of reality altogether.
You might want to add to this one, Sarah, because it's quite relevant to what you guys do as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that it's the element of what's real and what isn't real, and the way in which those I think Ludo, you were talking earlier on about the participatory experience, and one of the things I think is quite interesting is how a lot of the non-linear story can take place in the audience's minds, and that it's not just about the experience that we present to them, but the non-linear nature and how they interpret it is a story that they're creating completely outside of that. So I actually think there's a lot of work and research to be done on that area, because I don't think there's a lot going on to explore the impact of that and the potential of it, really. Yeah.
Now then, what else have we got in this list here? Okay, so Robbie's asking, well, he's asking you, Luda, but I think actually, again, it might be something for all of you, but what difficulties do you encounter when trying to tell a complete story when the narrative is non-linear? Because obviously, as you said earlier, you'll get people asking sections and bits, or might go down one line of the branch, but not all four. So do audiences lose something by having a non-linear experience, do you think?
I'll give a brief answer and then I'll leave others to respond. I think it's also going back to the idea of accessibility and usability, because not everyone has the same ability to spend the same amount of time in a story. And so I don't think the answer comes from linearity, because obviously linearity sort of forces you to stay in contact with the story for a certain amount of time, but it doesn't mean that everyone has the same amount of resistance, the same attention span. So the fact that there is a certain set time and you pay the ticket to be in the cinema for that amount of time doesn't mean that you're necessarily taking it in the same way as the person sitting next to you. So I think this is not necessarily relevant to linearity or non-linearity. It is relevant to developing a sensitivity towards the diversity of the users and the diversity of the audience, which is obviously also a political issue. And so asking ourselves, who are the people who are going to be experiencing this is crucial. What is their body? What is their positioning, and et cetera, et cetera. So and then the duration is not necessarily spending longer in an experience doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna have a better or deeper experience. So maybe we need to think in slightly less performative terms about this kind of experiences, and more, as Sarah was saying, developing a new way of determining the impact of how these stories are making people change or feel.
Can I just add to that, actually, because it's something that I think is really interesting around this sort of trade-off between the agency that you're giving the audience means that you have less, as a curator, you have less agency and control over how people are going to be feeling. As I completely agree with you, Luda, in terms of, and that is it's a big decision, because even with our experiences, which are that sort of personal storytelling, there are different types of stories and answers that people give. Some of them might be extremely emotional, challenging answers, and others might be sort of shorter, lighter, and you have no way, apart from our suggestions that we bring forward, of directing people to those bits of content. It's one of the reasons why we added in those layers of suggestions. So you have to kind of let that go to a certain extent, and think it's something that the audience is participating in and creating themselves, and that's, I don't know, it's a trade-off. Trade-off sounds a bit negative, but it's a power that you have to forego for the audience.
It's almost like you're not quite, but you're almost creating a two-way relationship between your entity and the audience without having you as a curator in as part of that mix. You're almost taking the director out, aren't you? And then having to just let them go and hope that you've put enough stuff in the back end that it works and it's authentic, I guess, you know.
I guess you've got to kind of let go of some of that creative control. You know, for you, Sarah, if there's an answer that or a strand of answers that you're like, wow, this interview's really been amazing, we've got this out of it, but the and that's kind of really emotional and intense, but then actually the audience go down all the light-hearted funny answers, they miss that. It's kind of, you've got to go, okay, it's almost no longer yours. And the same for us is, if as these strands develop, I'm sure we'll have kind of preferred strands, preferred choices, preferred kind of views. And as it deviates, and maybe that one that we like doesn't actually get chosen very often, that might be quite disappointing. But it's about kind of trying to have that separation from, I suppose.
One of the things I think it gives us, and it could give you the opportunity to do as well, is the opportunity for flagging up those missed elements to audiences after they've left. So one of the things we did with the Nile Rodgers experience, so people had gone through it, and then we had them on our email database. So we actually sort of emailed them afterwards, you know, say sort of a series of sequence of emails asking, you know, did you ask him about storytelling or songwriting? Did you ask him about the types of people he worked with? So then you could actually sort of drip feed completely different ideas. We also had one which was 10 unexpected questions that you didn't know he'd answered in this experience. So then we got people returning to the experience because they realized there were more things to explore. So I think that gives the whole non-linear narrative piece a whole other life. It's like you were saying about your experience, that they could watch 4 different plays. So you could, after people had gone and seen this one, you could give them little glimpses of what might have happened if they'd made different choices, which would be really interesting.
And I guess maybe more so for you, but you're collecting data as well, because each time you can see which choices get chosen. And I guess even with ours, it's that thing of, well, you could, I guess, use this for almost malicious purposes of having set kind of choices and then using that data to find out kind of people's political views. You know, we could be doing some sort of political poll of the people of York, which we're not going to do, but I suppose it's an extra layer that in a linear narrative that doesn't have that same thing, that same element of choice, you wouldn't be able to get.
Yeah. And I also wanted to say that I think in the passage between sort of experimental film as a finished film, as a complete film, to video installation, there was already this kind of similar question that things could go wrong the minute you bring a projector into a gallery. Projectors break, and there was this element of live, and somehow now there is the expectation that because technologies are supposed to be perfect, then there shouldn't be any problem, any breakdown, any issue. But actually, I think we need to kind of make it as something that is part of it. It's the element that it's live, it's performative, and well, with you, Joly and Anna, it's a performance, but there's a lot of actual creative people in the digital media that are still afraid of things going wrong. But I think this is actually really an interesting element to play with. I find
push it till it breaks.
I remember when I was young, you'd go to the movie theater and the reel would suddenly stop working and the audience would sit and shout and go, hey, what's going on? And then when they got it back on, the audience would clap. Yay! I just accepted that was part of going to a film, you know?
That was me last night when the tech broke and we came back again, you know? Okay. Okay, a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. So this is from Robbie again. I'm sorry, Robbie, you've got a zillions in today. You're on form, so I'm not going to be able to ask all of them. But for Sarah, meet the survivors encounter. Where does this project go next? Are you taking it to other countries, or are you having other survivors, or are you evolving it? What's the next plan for you?
Yeah, so on that survival element, or at least those sort of harder hitting pieces or cultural pieces, there is quite a lot happening. So we're working with the Auckland University of Technology to do a piece of work with members of the Maori community. So they are obviously leading that in terms of content. We're simply providing the technology to them and some advice around that, but that's going to be really interesting and a really important piece of work for them and potentially the country. And we've also got applications coming up with cancer survivors in association with the Open University and the NHS, because they want to look at how cancer survivors who have had a really intense period of treatment, looked after for a long period of time, and then after they've had their treatment, they're kind of let go into the community, having had, some of them, a very long and intense and emotional journey. And them, just as they're leaving hospital, to be able to give them a QR code or something like that, where you could say, you can talk to somebody who had the same experience as you, and they have been, they've shared their story with you about how they found that, what they found difficult, how they helped their mental health. So you can actually kind of connect that peer-to-peer support in a way that's anonymous and provides a safe space for people to ask questions. So quite different in a way from the Holocaust survivor type educational work, but similar themes.
Right, that's going to be really powerful, actually. Wow. Keep us posted, Sarah.
I will.
Okay, so last question from Imogen. For everyone, do you think non-linear narratives have the potential to be better at engaging a wider audience in your experiences? For example, neurodiverse communities who might not access narratives easily in the more traditional format. What do you reckon, folks?
I think ours will allow us to definitely, and more generally, allows more people to get involved. I'm not sure whether ours necessarily has more of an appeal to neurodivergent people, but it would definitely be, I guess, because it's got that element of interactivity, and it's more dynamic. It steps away from the traditional theatrical tropes. So therefore, you could, someone who struggles to kind of sit still or keep quiet in a theatre doesn't necessarily have that same experience, because they can kind of have an outburst, and that would only add to the experience. But I think it just makes us have a broader audience generally, because rather than going, this is a political thriller that looks at this and has a particular political standpoint, we're almost opening it up to more people and more views to kind of be involved.
I think it's also like, I've just finished working on a project, a VR musical, and I think sometimes musicals have like this, not everyone can go to the theatre, not everyone can go to London and go to the West End, but with our project you can walk down to your local library where there'll be a headset, you can put it on and experience a musical. So I guess in that sense, these kind of non-linear narratives, depending on where you're putting them and how accessible you're making them, can provide experiences that people wouldn't be able to normally have.
And I think that's about the building on that theme as well, really, that I think it does provide, digital experiences provide that element of a safe space. Something that we're seeing as a real benefit of this type of approach is the ability to ask unexpected, some people might be worried or have an anxiety around asking a stupid question, or something that maybe they haven't phrased it correctly, or maybe they're worried about that. And so asking questions in a public space, if you're feeling anxious and feeling like you are not sure you're going to express yourself in front of other people in a way that doesn't make you anxious, using digital technologies to provide safe spaces for people to spend as much time as they want, go away, come back, is very freeing for some people in terms of audience participation, I think.
No, definitely. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm afraid that is. Oh, sorry, Ludo.
No,
No,
I
please,
just
no,
very
please.
quickly,
Go on.
because our public space is digital, I think the public space we cannot not think of having digital experiences that build elements of our public space. So I guess that's where the audience lies, in the digital realm. So thank you so much.
No worries, and that was a great end point, actually. So we've run out of time, unfortunately, but it was a really good chat. I was enjoying that. So and really excellent presentations again. So a massive thank you to you guys for your presentations, for your insights and your expertise, and for sharing that with us today. Really appreciate your time and effort and wisdom. So thank you very much for you guys, and thank you to our audience and for all your fantastic questions and comments, and for joining us and joining in. It really makes a difference to have that feedback, and your questions are always much better than mine, so thank you for your participation. Really appreciate that. Finally, once again, thank you to our sponsors, Sign, for providing the funding for the festival, without which we couldn't run it. So big thank you to you guys. And if you want to share this with your friends, northerndigifest.co.uk, and in there will be session recordings available, usually within about an hour of the end of this. We're quite efficient in getting them up there, so feel free to share them with your friends and family or anyone else you might know. Okay, so later today at 6 o'clock we're going to have a session on interactive storytelling, and we'll be joined by Bright Black, by Nina Rusakov from Love Wish Games, and by Ben Kerman, who is from the University of York, doing Play On, which you might be interested in, Joly and Anna, which is a really interesting interactive theatre experiences across Europe. So join us then if you can. If not, as I say, the recordings will be available. And once again, just thank you very much, guys, for your time today. And for everyone else, have a great weekend.